I'm sitting here in my apartment in Davao, staring at my phone screen showing another 700 wire transfer to a woman who disappeared with my heart and maybe my child. Alona told me she wanted my baby. She said it was all she ever dreamed of. I believed her. I gave her my heart, my trust, and a future. Then she vanished, and now every month I send money to a child I'm not even sure is mine. This is my confession. This is how a 61-year-old man learned that loneliness makes you stupid, and how love can become the most expensive lie you'll ever buy. The jeepney was packed that afternoon in February, bodies pressed together in the humid Davao heat, the smell of diesel fumes mixing with street food and sweat. But all I could feel was Alona's small hand in mine, her fingers intertwined with my weathered ones like we were teenagers on our first date. She leaned against my shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper, almost lost in the rumble of the engine and the chatter of other passengers. "Richard, I dream about having your baby every night." My heart stopped. At 61, divorced for 8 years, with 2 grown kids back in Ohio who hadn't called me in 3 years, I thought those words were impossible. The idea that someone would want to create life with me, would see me as father material, felt like a miracle I didn't deserve. "You really mean that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. She looked up at me with those dark eyes that had captured me from the very first day I met her, eyes that seemed to see something in me that even I couldn't see. "I've never wanted anything more in my life, Richard. You would be such a good father. I can see it in how gentle you are with me, how you take care of me." The other passengers were chatting in Bisaya around us, their voices creating a soundtrack to what felt like the most important moment of my life. But in that moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the world. I squeezed her hand tighter, afraid that if I let go, this dream would evaporate like steam from the hot pavement outside. "I want that too, sweetheart. More than you know. More than I've wanted anything in years." She smiled that smile that made me feel like I was 30 again, that made me forget about my gray hair and my expanding waistline and the way my knees creaked when I stood up. "Then let's make it happen, my love. Let's build our family together. Let's create something beautiful that will last forever." I believed every word. God help me, I believed every single word that came out of her mouth. How did I get to this point? Sending money to a ghost while sitting alone in a foreign country. 6 months earlier, I was unpacking boxes in a 1-bedroom apartment in Davao City, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Retirement from the United States Postal Service had left me with a decent pension and a gold watch, but no purpose, no reason to get up in the morning. My ex-wife Linda had taken half of everything in the divorce, including the house where I'd raised my children and my kids. Well, they made it crystal clear they blamed me for breaking up the family. "You chose yourself over us, Dad," my daughter Sarah had said during our last phone conversation. "Don't expect us to pretend everything's fine now." My son Michael had been even more direct. "You're dead to me." So there I was, facing decades of loneliness in some Florida retirement community, playing bingo twice a week and waiting to die among strangers who smelled like medication and regret. The Philippines seemed like a chance to start over, to find some meaning in whatever years I had left, maybe find some peace. Maybe find someone who could see past my mistakes, past my failures as a husband and father. The cost of living was low, the weather was warm, and I'd heard stories of American men finding happiness with younger Filipino women who appreciated them in ways their American wives never had. I know how that sounds now, but at the time, it felt like hope. I met Alona on my 3rd week in the city, at a cafe inside SM Mall where she worked part-time while attending college. The place was busy, filled with the sound of Filipino families chatting over coffee and pastries, and I was struggling with the menu, trying to figure out what to order. She was wiping down tables when I approached the counter, pointing at items and trying to communicate my order through a combination of broken English and desperate hand gestures. She laughed, not at me but with genuine amusement that didn't feel mocking or condescending. "Sir, you can speak English perfectly fine. I understand you completely." Her voice was soft, musical, with that particular Filipino accent that makes everything sound like a gentle song. "Oh, thank God," I said, and she laughed again, a sound that made me feel lighter than I had in months. I was worried I'd have to mime my way through ordering food for the rest of my life. She had this way of tilting her head when she smiled that made me feel witty, charming even, like I was still capable of making someone happy just by being myself. We talked for an hour that day while she cleaned tables and restocked napkins. She told me about her dreams of becoming a teacher, about helping her family escape poverty, about wanting to travel the world someday and see places she'd only read about in books. I told her about America, about my 30 years working for the Postal Service, about feeling lost in retirement and not knowing what to do with the rest of my life. "You don't seem lost to me," she said, pausing in her work to really look at me. "You seem like a man who's just beginning his real adventure." I left that cafe feeling lighter than I had in years, like maybe there was still something good waiting for me in this new chapter of my life. Our first real date was 3 days later. I picked her up after her shift at the call center where she worked full-time, a cramped office building in downtown Davao, where hundreds of young Filipinos spent their nights talking to angry Americans about their cable bills and credit card problems. She looked exhausted when she emerged from the building at midnight, her shoulders sagging from 8 hours of dealing with complaints and insults from people who saw her as nothing more than a voice on the phone. "Rough night?" I asked as she slid into my rented Toyota. She smiled, but I could see the tiredness behind her eyes. "They called me stupid tonight because I couldn't fix their internet immediately. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." I wanted to tell her she was too good for that job, too smart and too kind to be treated like that by strangers who didn't even know her name. Instead, I drove her to a 24-hour restaurant by the water where we could talk without the noise and chaos of the city center. Over chicken adobo and rice, she told me about growing up in a small barangay outside the city, where her father had abandoned the family when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 4 children alone. "I promised myself I would never be poor like that again," she said, stirring her food without really eating it. "I would get an education, get a good job, take care of my family." The way she talked about responsibility, about duty to her loved ones, made me respect her even more. This wasn't some party girl looking for easy money from foreign men. This was a woman with goals, with character, with values I understood and admired. The red flags started small, so subtle I almost didn't notice them at first. 3 weeks into our relationship, Alona mentioned casually that her rent was due, and she was short 5,000 pesos. Because her mother had needed emergency medication for her diabetes. I hate to even mention it, Richard, but my family had medical expenses this month, and I gave them my rent money because I couldn't let my mother suffer. I just need to borrow it until my next paycheck comes in. The way she said it, so apologetic, so ashamed of having to ask, made me want to protect her, to be her hero. Of course, I gave her the money. What kind of man would let his girlfriend get evicted when he could easily help? A week later, it was her college tuition. She'd been taking night classes to finish her degree, something she'd mentioned proudly on our first date as proof of her ambition and drive. "I'm so close to graduating, Richard, but if I can't pay this semester's fees, I'll have to drop out. All my dreams of becoming a teacher, gone." Her eyes filled with tears as she showed me the bill. 15 pesos that might as well have been $1 million for someone earning minimum wage at a call center. I felt like a hero handing over the money, like I was investing in our future together. "Don't even think about paying me back," I told her. "Education is important. I want to support your dreams." She hugged me so tight I could smell her shampoo, feel her heart beating against my chest, and in that moment, I felt more needed, more important, than I had since my divorce. But then strange things started happening that should have made me suspicious. Her phone would buzz constantly during our dates, text after text, and she'd flip it face down without looking, dismissing each interruption with a wave of her hand. "Just work messages," she'd say, but her call center job ended at midnight and we'd be having dinner at 2 a.m. When I asked about meeting her family, something that seemed natural after a month of dating, she'd change the subject or make excuses. "They're very traditional, Richard. They need time to accept that I'm dating a foreigner. My mother especially is worried about what the neighbors will think." I wanted to push, to insist that if we were serious about each other, I should at least meet the people most important to her. But every time doubt crept in, every time I started to question her stories or her behavior, she'd do something that made me feel special again. She'd cook my favorite adobo from scratch, spending hours in her tiny kitchen to make sure it was perfect. Or she'd surprise me with a back massage after a long day of exploring the city, her small hands working out knots of tension I didn't even know I was carrying. Or she'd tell me how different I was from other men she'd known, how special our connection was. Filipino men just want to take? She'd whisper as we lay in bed listening to the rain on her tin roof. They want sex, they want money, they want someone to take care of them. But you, Richard, you want to give. You want to build something beautiful together. Those words were like medicine to my wounded ego, balm for all the years of feeling like a failure as a husband and father. The night she first mentioned wanting my baby, we were in her small apartment in Tugbok District, a working-class neighborhood where the streets flooded every time it rained and the power went out at least twice a week. She'd cooked dinner by candlelight because the electricity had been shut off again, and afterward we were lying in bed listening to the soundtrack of Tropical Night, cicadas, distant music from a neighbor's radio, the occasional motorcycle roaring past on the unpaved street outside. The intimacy of it, the way she fit perfectly against my chest, made me feel like I was finally home after years of wandering. "Richard," she said, tracing lazy circles on my chest with her finger, "can I tell you something important?" I pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling more content than I'd felt in years. "Anything, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel her heart racing against my ribs, like she was building up courage for something big. "I've been thinking about us, about our future together, about what we could build if we really committed to each other." I waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say would change everything between us. "I want your baby, Richard. I want to carry your child and raise a family with you." The words hit me like electricity, like someone had just plugged me into a power source I didn't know existed. My ex-wife Linda had made it clear years ago that she was done having children, that 2 was enough, that we needed to focus on careers and retirement savings instead of adding more mouths to feed. But here was this beautiful young woman, 37 years younger than me, who wanted to carry my child, who saw me as worthy of creating new life with. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm 61 years old, Alona. You could have babies with someone your own age, someone who could give you a better life, someone who'll be around longer to help raise them." She sat up in bed and looked at me with such intensity I felt like she could see straight through to my soul. "I don't want someone my age, Richard. Young Filipino men are immature, they don't know how to treat a woman, they don't understand responsibility. I want someone who knows how to love, how to protect, how to be a real man. I want your baby because I want you forever." I felt tears in my eyes, actual tears, something I hadn't experienced since the day my divorce was finalized. "I want that too," I whispered. "I want it more than anything I've ever wanted in my life." She kissed me then, deep and desperate, like she was trying to seal a promise with her lips. "Then let's try, my love. Let's make our family. Let's create something beautiful together that no one can ever take away from us." That night felt like the beginning of everything I'd ever wanted but never thought I deserved. Within days of that conversation, our entire relationship shifted around this shared dream of creating life together. Alona started researching pregnancy and prenatal care with an intensity that impressed me. She'd spend hours on her phone looking up information about conception, about getting her body ready for pregnancy, about nutrition and vitamins and everything a woman needed to do to ensure a healthy baby. "I want everything to be perfect for our child," she'd say, her hand resting on her flat stomach as if she could already imagine it growing round with our baby. "I need to start taking proper vitamins, eating the right foods, getting regular checkups to make sure there are no problems." When she asked for money for prenatal supplements, it seemed not just reasonable but responsible, the kind of planning that proved she was taking our future seriously. "I want to make sure my body is ready to give you a healthy baby," she explained, showing me a handwritten list of vitamins and nutrients that were important for conception and early pregnancy. I sent her 8,000 pesos without hesitation, proud that she was being so thorough, so careful with something so important to both of us. Then it was doctor consultations. "I want to get a full health screening, Richard, to make sure there are no problems that could prevent pregnancy or cause complications. I want to do this right." Another 10,000 pesos for what seemed like the most reasonable request in the world. Each request came with detailed explanations, with research she'd done online, with a level of thoughtfulness and preparation that made me feel like she was taking our future as seriously as I was. For 2 months, our conversations revolved entirely around our future child. She'd send me pictures of baby clothes at the market, tiny outfits that made my heart ache with anticipation. "Look how cute this would be for our little boy," she'd text, followed by heart emojis and messages about how excited she was to become a mother. We'd spend hours talking about names, debating whether we wanted a traditionally Filipino name or an American one, discussing how we'd raise the child bilingual so he could navigate both cultures with confidence. We talked about the house we'd buy once the baby came, how we'd need more space, maybe a small yard where our son could play safely. "I want 3 bedrooms," she'd say, her eyes bright with excitement. "One for us, one for the baby, and one for when your children from America come to visit. I want our family to bring your family back together." The way she included my estranged kids in our fantasy future made me love her even more. She had this way of making everything sound so real, so possible, so inevitable. "When our son is old enough, we'll take him to America to meet his grandparents," she'd say. "He'll be so proud to have a father who worked so hard his whole life, who came so far to find happiness." I'd never felt more important, more needed, more like the man I'd always wanted to be. She made me feel like my age was an asset, not a liability, like my experience and maturity were exactly what she wanted in the father of her children. I started sending her more money as the weeks passed, each request logical and tied to our shared goal of starting a family. "I need to eat better protein for my reproductive health," she'd explain, asking for extra money for fish and meat and fresh vegetables. "The doctor says my iron levels are low, which could affect fertility." Another 5,000 pesos. "I want to start going to a private clinic for better prenatal care once I'm pregnant. The public hospitals here are overcrowded and the doctors don't speak English well." 8,000 pesos for a deposit with a private gynecologist. "I'm going to quit the night shift at the call center once I'm pregnant. The stress and lack of sleep could be bad for the baby." 12,000 pesos to help with her transition to day shift, which paid less but would be better for her health. Each request made perfect sense in the context of preparing for pregnancy and ensuring the best possible outcome for our child. I found myself looking forward to these conversations, to the way she included me in every decision, made me feel like a partner in this miraculous process of creating new life. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March that started like any other, everything changed in a way that would haunt me for months afterward. I called her as usual before my morning coffee, eager to hear her voice and start the day with our customary exchange of endearments and plans. But her phone went straight to voicemail, that generic automated message that gives no clue about why someone isn't answering. I figured maybe her battery had died overnight, a common occurrence in her neighborhood where power outages were frequent and phone chargers were always failing. So I tried again around lunch, then again in the afternoon, each unanswered call increasing my anxiety. By evening, I was genuinely worried. Alona never went more than a few hours without responding to my messages, and a full day of silence was completely out of character. I decided to drive to her apartment building in Tugbach, that familiar route through crowded streets that I'd traveled so many times over the past 4 months. But when I arrived, the landlady met me at the gate with news that made my blood turn to ice. "She moved out yesterday, sir," the old woman told me in broken English, her expression sympathetic but matter-of-fact. "Very quick. Take everything." The words didn't make sense at first. "Move out? Where did she go?" The landlady shook her head. "No forwarding address, sir. She just pay rent and go." Very fast. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Did she say anything about why she was leaving? Did she seem upset or scared? But the woman just shrugged. "She seemed normal, sir. Just pack everything and go." I spent the next 2 hours driving around Davao like a madman, checking every place I could think of where Alona might be. The call center where she worked, but the security guard told me she'd quit 3 days earlier without giving notice. The college where she was taking night classes, but the registrar's office was closed and wouldn't open until the next day. The hospital where she'd been getting her health screenings, but they said they couldn't give out patient information. I even drove to the neighborhood where she'd grown up, though I'd never been there, and only had vague directions based on stories she'd told me. Nothing. It was like she'd simply evaporated, leaving no trace behind except the memories of our conversations and the growing panic in my chest. For 2 weeks I heard nothing. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the terrible possibilities running through my mind. Maybe something terrible had happened to her. Maybe she'd been in an accident. or her family had an emergency, or she'd been hurt and was lying unconscious in some hospital where no one knew to contact me. I kept checking local news websites for reports of accidents or crimes involving young women. I contacted the police, but they told me that adults have the right to disappear, that unless there was evidence of foul play, there was nothing they could do. Maybe she just wanted to end the relationship, sir, one officer suggested with the casual indifference of someone who'd seen this scenario countless times before. I wanted to scream at him that he didn't understand, that this wasn't some casual breakup. We were planning a family. People don't just vanish when they're planning to have a baby together. Then, at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart stop. Her name appeared on my screen for the first time in 2 weeks, and I grabbed the phone so fast I nearly dropped it. Richard, I'm sorry I disappeared. I had to go home to my province because of a family emergency. I have news. I'm pregnant. I read those words over and over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Pregnant. She was pregnant with our child. The relief was overwhelming, washing over me like a wave that swept away 2 weeks of terror and uncertainty. But mixed with the relief was confusion and hurt. Pregnant? Alona, where are you? Are you okay? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? I've been worried sick. No response for 6 hours, which felt like an eternity. Then, I'm fine, and the baby is fine too. I just needed space to process everything. This is all happening so fast and I'm scared. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold her, to comfort her, to be there for her during what should be the most exciting time in our lives. Tell me where you are. I want to come to you. I want to take care of you both. But she wouldn't tell me her location, wouldn't give me any details about where she was staying or how I could reach her except through text messages. The internet connection is bad here in the province. Phone calls don't work well, but don't worry, we're both healthy. The doctor says everything looks good. I tried calling anyway, desperate to hear her voice, to have some real confirmation that she was okay, but the calls went straight to voicemail every time. The next 3 months passed in a surreal haze of sporadic text messages and growing frustration. Alona would go days without responding to my messages, then suddenly send a flood of texts about the pregnancy, about how she was feeling, about preparations for the baby. But every detail was vague. Every attempt I made to get specific information was deflected or ignored. How far along are you exactly? I'd ask. About 3 months now, she'd respond. But when I did the math based on when we'd last been together, it didn't add up. Which doctor are you seeing? What hospital will you deliver at? These seemed like reasonable questions for the father of the child to ask, but her answers were always evasive. A good doctor here in the province. Everything is being taken care of. When I pressed for more details, for the name of the doctor or the hospital, she'd get defensive. Why are you asking so many questions? Don't you trust me? I'm doing everything right for our baby. The guilt those words triggered was immense. Of course I should trust her. She was carrying my child, dealing with pregnancy in a foreign culture, while I sat in my comfortable apartment in the city. Who was I to question her decisions about her own medical care? Then came the first request for money since her disappearance, but now it carried a weight and importance that made refusing unthinkable. Richard, I need your help. The baby is growing and I need proper nutrition, good medical care, vitamins, everything to ensure our child is healthy. Can you send 35,000 pesos every month for our baby's needs? The amount hit me like a physical blow. 35,000 pesos was about $700, a significant chunk of my monthly pension. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about my child, my responsibility as a father. Alona, that's a lot of money. I want to help, but I need to see you. I need to see an ultrasound. I need to be involved in the pregnancy. Her response came hours later, and something in the tone felt different, colder than the loving messages I was used to receiving. Why don't you trust me, Richard? This is your baby. Our baby. If you don't want to support your own child, just say so. There are other men who would be happy to step up and be a real father. The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. What kind of man questions supporting his own child? What kind of father puts his own financial concerns above the health and welfare of his unborn baby? I'm sorry, I typed back, hating myself for even hesitating. Of course I'll help, I just miss you so much. I want to be there for both of you. She softened after that, returning to the loving tone I craved. I know, my love. This is just a difficult time for me. The pregnancy hormones make me emotional, and being away from you is hard. But once the baby comes, we'll be together again. You'll see your son, and everything will be perfect. I sent the first 35,000 pesos that day, telling myself I was doing the right thing, being a responsible father, putting my child's needs before my own doubts. But as the months dragged on and the payments continued, my requests for proof, for involvement, for any kind of real connection to this pregnancy were always met with excuses that grew more elaborate and less believable. The internet is terrible here in the province. I can barely send text messages, let alone video calls. I'm too tired from the pregnancy to talk on the phone for long. The doctor says I need to rest as much as possible. The ultrasound machine at the local clinic is broken. I'll get pictures when I go to the city next month. Sometimes she'd send photos, but they were always blurry, always cropped in ways that made it impossible to verify anything. A shadowy image that could have been anyone's ultrasound, a picture of a slightly rounded belly that could have belonged to any woman at any stage of pregnancy. When I asked specific questions about the baby's development, about due dates, about the details that any expectant father would want to know, her answers were vague and inconsistent. Everything is normal, she'd say. The doctor says the baby is healthy and growing well. But which doctor? What was the baby's expected birth weight? When exactly was the due date? These seemed like basic information that any pregnant woman would know, but every time I pressed for specifics, she'd get defensive and turn the conversation back to money. I can't deal with stress right now, Richard. It's bad for the baby. Why can't you just trust me and support us? The breaking point began with a conversation I had with Gary, an American expat in his 60s who'd been living in Davao for 5 years. We'd met at a bar frequented by foreigners, one of those places where middle-aged Western men gathered to drink beer and complain about their home countries, while surrounded by young Filipino women who laughed at their jokes and called them handsome. Gary had the weathered look of someone who'd learned hard lessons about relationships in the Philippines, and he'd been watching my situation with what I now realize was experienced concern. One evening, after I'd been sending money to Alona for 6 months and she was supposedly 8 months pregnant, Gary pulled me aside with the uncomfortable expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "Richard, I need to tell you something about your girl, and you're not going to like it." He looked genuinely pained, like he was about to tell me my dog had cancer. "I've seen her around town multiple times in the past few months. She's not in any province, brother. She's here in Davao, and she doesn't look pregnant. Not even a little bit." The words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach dropped, and I felt that familiar sensation of my world tilting off its axis. "What do you mean she doesn't look pregnant?" I asked, though part of me already knew what he was going to say. Gary took a long sip of his beer, giving me time to process what I was hearing. "I mean, she looks exactly the same as she did 6 months ago, Richard. Flat stomach, same body shape. If she's really 8 months pregnant like you've been telling people, she should be showing significantly by now." He paused, watching my face carefully. "And I've seen her with other foreign guys at the mall. Different guy each time. Always older men, always Western. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to call him a liar, to accuse him of jealousy or spite or some petty motivation for destroying my happiness. Instead, I just stared at my beer and felt the carefully constructed fantasy I'd been living begin to crumble around me. "Maybe she's just not showing much," I said weakly, grasping for any explanation that would let me keep believing. "Some women don't show until very late in pregnancy." Gary shook his head sadly. "Brother, I've seen pregnant women before. Hell, my ex-wife had 3 kids. When a woman is 8 months pregnant, you know it. You can't hide that." He put his hand on my shoulder with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Richard. I really am. But you know what you know. Trust your gut." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone for hours, trying to work up the courage to send the message I knew would change everything. The air conditioning hummed in the background, but I was sweating anyway, my heart pounding like I was about to jump off a cliff. Finally, at around midnight, I typed the words I'd been afraid to send for months. "Alona, I was in town today, and someone said they saw you at SM Mall. I thought you were in the province?" Her response was immediate and angry, confirming my worst suspicions even as she denied them. Who told you that? People here are jealous of our relationship and they spread lies about successful women who have foreign boyfriends. I'm 2 hours away from Davao, Richard. Why are you listening to gossip instead of trusting the mother of your child? The way she turned it around on me made me feel guilty for even asking, should have been the final confirmation I needed. But I was in too deep by then. I'd already paid over 200,000 pesos. I'd already built an entire future in my mind around this child. I'd already told myself that accepting it was all a lie would mean accepting that I was the biggest fool in the Philippines, maybe the biggest fool who'd ever lived. 2 months later, sitting in that same bar where Gary had tried to warn me, I finally worked up the courage to send the message that would end everything. It was a sweltering Thursday evening, the kind of tropical heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin and your thoughts move like molasses. I'd been carrying the weight of knowledge for weeks, knowing in my heart that there was no baby, that there had never been a baby, but unable to face the implications of that truth. Finally, with 10 months of payments behind me and Gary's words echoing in my head, I opened Facebook Messenger and typed the question I'd been afraid to ask. Alona, I need you to be honest with me. Is there really a baby? Are you really pregnant? Or have you been lying to me this whole time? For 3 hours, nothing. I sat in my apartment, sweating in the heat despite the air conditioning, wondering if I'd finally pushed too hard, asked the question that would expose the lie we'd both been living. When her response finally came, it was exactly what I expected, but somehow still managed to devastate me completely. How can you ask me that? After everything we've shared, everything we've planned, all the money you've sent for our child's welfare, this is your son, Richard. Your son. And you're asking if he even exists? What kind of father doubts his own child? The way she said your son like she was trying to twist the knife deeper made something snap inside me. All the months of doubt, all the unanswered questions, all the red flags I'd ignored came flooding back. Then prove it, I typed, my hands shaking with anger and heartbreak and 10 months of suppressed suspicion. 1 ultrasound photo with your name on it. 1 video call where I can see your belly. 1 piece of real evidence that there's actually a baby. If I'm really going to be a father, I have the right to see some proof. Her final response came an hour later, and it shattered what was left of my heart while simultaneously confirming everything I'd feared. Maybe you don't deserve to be in our lives. Maybe my son is better off without a father who doesn't trust his own family, who questions everything instead of just loving and supporting us. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to be a real man and support your child without all these doubts and questions. That was it. After 10 months of promises, of dreams, of monthly payments totaling over 350,000 pesos. She cut me off because I dared to ask for proof that the child I was supporting actually existed. That was the moment I finally understood what had been happening to me. The moment the fog of denial and desperation finally lifted and I saw the situation clearly for the first time. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. Alona had seen a lonely old man, desperate to feel important again, desperate to have someone need him, desperate to believe he could still be a father and a protector and a provider. She'd played me perfectly, understanding exactly what I wanted to hear, and feeding it to me in carefully measured doses designed to keep the money flowing month after month. Sitting alone in my apartment that night, with the truth finally undeniable, the full scope of my stupidity hit me like a typhoon. I'd sent her over 350,000 pesos, the equivalent of about $7,000, chasing a dream that existed only in my desperate imagination. Every conversation about baby names and nurseries and our future family had been a performance designed to exploit my loneliness and my need to feel needed. Every loving message, every expression of gratitude, every promise of our beautiful future together had been carefully calculated to keep me sending money month after month. The woman I thought loved me, who I thought wanted to build a life with me, who I thought was carrying my child, had been running an elaborate con from the very beginning. I'd been too blinded by loneliness and the fantasy of being chosen again, of being important to someone, to see what was right in front of me. She'd identified my weakness, my desperate need to feel valuable and needed, and she'd exploited it with the skill of someone who'd probably done this before. The next morning, with a clarity that comes only after complete devastation, I wrote her one final message. My hands were steady for the first time in months, as I typed words that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Alona, I know there's no baby. I've known for months, but I kept paying because I hoped I was wrong, because I wanted so badly to believe that someone could want to build a family with me. I hope whoever you really are, beneath all the lies and manipulation, finds genuine happiness someday, but I'm done being your source of income. I'm done chasing a dream that was never real. I blocked her number before she could respond, blocked her Facebook account, canceled the monthly wire transfer, and changed my phone number. For weeks afterward, she tried reaching me through different Facebook accounts, each attempt more desperate than the last. Sometimes the messages were angry, accusing me of abandoning my child, threatening to take legal action, claiming I was destroying an innocent baby's future. Sometimes they were pleading, begging me to reconsider, promising she'd provide proof if I just started sending money again. Once, she even claimed she'd lost the baby due to stress and needed money for medical bills, a final manipulation that confirmed everything I'd suspected about her willingness to exploit any situation for financial gain. I ignored them all. Every notification, every friend request from an obviously fake account, every attempt to pull me back into her web of lies. I'd learned my lesson, and it had cost me dearly. Looking back now, 8 months later, I understand exactly what happened to me and why I was so susceptible to Alona's manipulation. I came to the Philippines running from loneliness, from the devastating failure of my marriage, from the painful reality that my own children wanted nothing to do with me. I was a 61-year-old man facing the prospect of spending my remaining years alone, irrelevant, unloved, and forgotten. When a beautiful young woman told me she wanted my baby, when she painted a picture of a future where I was needed and important and valued, it felt like salvation. It felt like proof that my life wasn't over, that I could still be the man I'd always wanted to be. I ignored every red flag because I wanted to believe so desperately in the possibility of redemption, of second chances, of being chosen by someone who could have had anyone but chose me instead. The truth is, I enabled every moment of the deception because the alternative, accepting that I was alone and would likely remain alone, was too painful to face. Every time doubt crept in, every time logic tried to break through my emotional desperation, I pushed it away because the dream was more appealing than reality. When she asked for money, I told myself it was investment in our future. When she avoided video calls, I convinced myself she was just shy or tired or dealing with poor internet connection. When her stories didn't add up, I chose to believe her explanations rather than trust my own instincts. I wanted so badly to be important to someone again that I was willing to pay for the illusion of love and family. Alona wasn't evil, and I don't hate her now the way I probably should. She was a young woman from a poor family in a developing country where $700 a month can literally change your life. She saw an opportunity, an older foreign man desperate for connection and validation, and she took it. In her mind, she was probably providing a service, giving me the fantasy of love and family in exchange for financial support. She might have even convinced herself that what we had was real on some level, that the affection and attention she showed me had genuine elements even if the pregnancy was fabricated. The real fool in this story was me, for thinking love could be bought with wire transfers, for believing that someone 37 years younger would want to build a genuine life with a broken-down postal worker from Ohio. The $700 a month I was sending to chase that dream? I donate it now to a local orphanage here in Davao, to children who actually exist and actually need help. It feels better than funding lies and feeding fantasies. The money goes to real kids who need food, education, medical care, things that matter in the real world, rather than the elaborate fiction I was living in for almost a year. Every month when I make that donation, I think about the child I thought I was supporting, the son who existed only in my imagination and in Alona's carefully crafted stories. I still live in Davao, in the same apartment where I spent so many nights dreaming about the family Alona and I would build together. I still drink my coffee at that same cafe in SM Mall where we first met, though she doesn't work there anymore and I doubt she ever thinks about that conversation that started everything. Sometimes I see other foreign men my age with young Filipino women, and I watch their interactions with the sad wisdom of someone who's lived through this particular kind of heartbreak. I see the same look in their eyes that I used to have, that mixture of hope and disbelief that someone so young and beautiful could want them. I want to warn them sometimes, to tell them to be careful, to protect themselves from the kind of manipulation I fell victim to. but I know they wouldn't listen. When you're drowning in loneliness, someone throwing you a rope feels like a miracle, even if that rope is attached to an anchor that will drag you down further than you ever imagined possible. The loneliness that made me vulnerable to Alona's deception is still there. I wake up alone, eat my meals alone, go to bed alone, just like I did before I met her. But now there's a difference. Now I understand the cost of trying to buy love, of confusing financial dependency with genuine affection, of letting desperation override common sense. I've learned that being alone with your dignity intact is infinitely better than being surrounded by beautiful lies that will eventually crumble and leave you with nothing but regret and empty bank accounts. The pain of loneliness is real and it's difficult, but it's honest pain. The pain of being manipulated and deceived by someone you trusted with your heart is worse because it makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and your judgment. If you're watching this video because you're thinking about finding love in a foreign country, because you're lonely and looking for someone to make you feel young and important again, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. Some of these relationships are real. Some of these women genuinely love the men they meet, and some of these stories have happy endings that last decades. But please, for your own sake, and for the sake of your financial security and emotional well-being, don't let desperation make you blind to obvious red flags. Don't ignore warning signs because you want so badly to believe in something beautiful. Don't send money to someone you've never video called, never met in person, never seen actual proof of their claims about pregnancy or family emergencies, or any of the other common stories used to extract money from lonely hearts. Most importantly, don't try to buy love with monthly payments and wire transfers. Love that has to be purchased isn't love at all. It's a business transaction dressed up in romantic language, and like any business transaction, it will end when the money stops flowing. Real love doesn't come with a monthly fee. Real love doesn't avoid video calls or refuse to meet family members or disappear for weeks at a time with vague explanations. Real love doesn't ask you to prove your commitment by sending money to strangers. Love yourself enough to demand honesty, transparency, and genuine emotional connection. Love yourself enough to walk away when something feels wrong, when stories don't add up, when requests for money become a pattern rather than an emergency. And above all, love yourself enough to be alone rather than accepting beautiful lies that will eventually bankrupt your wallet and your faith in humanity. I learned that lesson at the cost of $7,000, and pieces of my heart I'll never fully recover. But the lesson was worth learning, even at that price, because now I know the difference between genuine connection and skilled manipulation. Now I understand that my worth as a person isn't determined by whether someone young and beautiful wants to be with me. My value doesn't depend on being needed financially or being seen as a provider or a savior. The hardest truth I've had to accept is that the child I mourned never existed, that the future I planned was built on lies, that the love I felt was entirely one-sided. But accepting that truth has set me free from the monthly anxiety of wondering whether I was being scammed, free from the constant need to justify suspicious behavior, free from the exhausting mental gymnastics required to maintain belief in something that deep down I knew wasn't real. The truth is painful, but it's also liberating. Today, as I finish telling you this story, I can honestly say that despite everything I've been through, despite the money I lost and the dreams that were shattered, I'm better off now than I was when I was living in that fantasy. I know who I am again. I know what I'm worth. And I know that any love worth having won't cost me $700 a month and my peace of mind. If my story can save even one person from making the same mistakes I made, then maybe all of this pain will have served some purpose. Trust me when I tell you that being alone with your dignity is infinitely better than being connected to someone through a web of lies and financial exploitation. Learn from my mistakes. Protect your heart and your wallet. And never, ever let loneliness make you so desperate that you'll pay any price for the illusion of love. Because in the end, that's all it is, an illusion. And when it finally crumbles, you'll be left with nothing but the expensive lesson that some dreams are too costly to chase.